Good morning, and let's continue with what we were talking about yesterday with the parts of the cell. And so, just to review a few things, we've already talked about prokaryotic versus eukaryotic cells. And so, everything we're talking about here when we're looking at the parts of the cell, we're going to concentrate on the eukaryotic cell because the eukaryotic cell is much more complex, has a lot more to it. And just to recap, your prokaryotic cells are pretty much nothing more than collections of nucleic acids and proteins with a few other little things mixed in there, and doesn't have nearly the same magnitude of other structures inside of it like a eukaryotic cell, especially membrane-bound structures like in the eukaryotic cell. So we talked about the parts of the cell theory to start yesterday, and we said there's three parts to it. All living things are made of cells, and cells are the basic unit of structure and function within an organism. So when we take an organism, we cut it down into smaller pieces, it will only still be considered a living piece once you get down to the cellular level. If you go down and cut any further and look at sections smaller than the cell, we're no longer looking at what we would classify as living features. They're parts of a living feature, but it's no longer considered a living thing. All right, and then we talk about cells come from pre-existing cells. So cells have the ability to recycle. They find things that are dead and broken, not being used anymore. I used the wrong term with dead there, but that's all right. They're broken or beyond repair. They're damaged. They've been terminated. The other cells around it have the ability to take that cell, recycle it, use those parts to be able to make new parts for that particular cell. All right, then we talked about the organization of the cell, and we said that when you have groups of cells working together for the same cause, we call that tissue. When we talk about groups of tissues working together for the same purpose, we then call that an organ. A group of organs working together for the same purpose is called an organ system. And then finally, a group of organ systems working together for the same purpose, we call that an organism. So you notice as we move down this list, we're going from smaller structures to larger structures, because obviously a cell is much smaller in us than us as an entire organism. What we can also look at is the fact that it's more simple to more complex, just because you're increasing the sheer number of cells every time you move from one of these levels to the next. All right, and so then we took a brief look at the animal cell versus the plant cell, and keep in mind there's prokaryotic cells, there's fungi cells, there's protista out there, there's different types of cells. We're going to concentrate just on the main three. We already looked at prokaryotic a little bit, and we'll come back to those in another lesson. Today we're going to concentrate on the plant cell versus the animal cell. And so something we noticed yesterday was the fact that animal cells are typically a little bit more oval in shape, whereas plant cells are typically more rectangular. And then we also looked at the fact that some of the features in the plant cell are not found in the animal cell and vice versa. So then we started looking at the cell membrane. And just as a reminder, when you were taking notes, your notes should be in a format that looks like this. We made it into into a tree map. And unfortunately, my scanner is too small to take everything here. But this column is the this row is the organelles. And then we have a picture to help us to remember what that organelle actually does. It's not necessarily a picture of the organelle itself. It's a picture that will help us to remember what it does. You know, for example, you can see on mine, this is supposed to be a battery. You can see in such a good drawer here. The battery here doesn't look that great, but for me, that works, and that's what I want us to concentrate on. Let's concentrate on taking notes that work for us. And so battery makes me remember, oh yeah, it's the mitochondria, it's the thing that provides energy for the cell. And then if we continue to go down a little bit, we have the functions of that particular organelle and the things that some other important features of it. And finally, the one section that's cut off that should be down here is an analogy to give you something to compare against. And so we said the mitochondria is like the power plant because it provides energy for the cell. I know the picture and analogy are kind of similar, and so if you want to have your picture be the analogy, great, or have a different picture. Like I said, for me, I have the battery, but then for my analogy, I had the power plant. So it's your notes. Make it work for you. All right, so we were taking the information from the PowerPoint and putting it into that format. So the cell membrane allows things to move in and out. We talked about it being similar to a strainer. For those of us that don't want all the garbage that's in the orange juice, we want to get all that pulp stuff out. And we have, of course, the debate because some people want that, some people don't. Another good example is a screen for a window. It allows the circulation of the air, but it doesn't allow the circulation of cats. For when you get tired of your cat and want to throw it out the window, the screen helps to protect a little bit, unless you're very persistent and want to try to get rid of the cat. And you have it's made up of a phospholipid bilayer. And so you can see here, we didn't really talk about the structure of phospholipids yet, but you can see it has this phosphate head and then it has 2 fatty acid tails. We'll talk more about the actual structure when we get into movement of stuff into and out of the cell. So when we talk about cell transport, we'll get more into that. But you can see there's also proteins in here. One other thing you'll find later on is that there's little carbohydrates that are hanging off from here to help provide energy when it's needed. And they're also used for recognition purposes, but like I said, we'll get into that more later on. All right, then we moved into the cytoplasm, and we got ourselves hungry talking about that because the cytoplasm is what provides a liquid environment for the circulation of things throughout the cell, and the analogy that we used in class yesterday that most of us liked was either jelly or a jelly-filled donut or a long john. And I think about the ooey deliciousness on the inside, that's similar to the cytoplasm. Other things can move around with it. Probably not the greatest analogy, but I think it helps to make the point that it's the gooey stuff inside of the cell. Somebody brought up a swimming pool with you hanging out in it and dunking your little brother or sister. You're hanging out in the liquid environment, the water, which has other stuff dissolved in it, the chlorine, maybe bromine, some of the other ions that you find in pool water. That would be a good example of the cytoplasm, and there's other things that are hanging out with it, you dunking your little brother or sister. The cytoplasm inside the cell, though, is mostly made up of water. So then we got into the mitochondria, which I already spoke to a little bit. It provides energy for the cell, acts as the powerhouse, often called the mighty mitochondria, and it provides the energy for the cell. And the process by which that energy is acquired and used is called cell respiration. That's going to be our next unit. We're going to get into we call it cell energetics. How do cells get the energy they need? So we'll get into photosynthesis because that's where it all starts, and we'll talk about how cell respiration is very similar to photosynthesis, but pretty much the opposite. All right, and so just to make my point about the pictures, you drawing this little kidney bean thing here and seeing that there's different membranes that make up the mitochondria, that's not going to help you remember what the mitochondria is. Draw the picture of the battery. Draw a picture of a light bulb. Something else that will help to spark your memory. Oh, when I see the light bulb, oh, that's light. Oh, light's a type of energy. Oh, that's right. Energy goes with mitochondria because the mitochondria provides energy for the cell. All right, so I want you to be thinking like that. And so that reviews, oh, I forgot, we talked about the vacuole yesterday too. That's the big storage closet. That's where we store everything. So, and these are typically a little bit bigger in plant cells. In fact, you can see in this example, it takes up the majority of the space of the plant cell. So the other thing we were doing with our notes yesterday is we were going through and coloring things. So you can see here's my plant cell, and I also have my animal cell here. And what you'll notice is on my notes, the color of what I color on my pictures is exactly the same as the color that I actually took the notes in. So I did all my cytoplasm notes in yellow, so that when you see yellow on the picture, oh, that's right, yellow is what the cytoplasm stuff with. Oh, okay, yellow goes with cytoplasm every time. And so you're going to want to make sure at this point, if you haven't armed yourself with a bunch of colored pencils, you want to get enough to be able to share with the people that are sitting around you. You may have to repeat some colors just because we may not have enough different colored pencils for you to be able to get through all of the cell organelles that we're going to talk about today. All right, today we're going to go through and we're going to do this 2 at a time. We're going to talk 2 of them, and then I'm going to ask that you pause the video, then go through and find those on your drawing page, color those in, and then come back to the video. We'll do 2 more, and we'll keep doing that the rest of the way through this particular lesson. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So let me get back to the PowerPoint, and let's go on to the nucleus. This is probably the one you guys are more familiar with because you've talked about nuclei in the past, and the nucleus is essentially the control center. And the reason why it's the control center is because of this stuff right here. This is where the DNA is found. All right, the DNA is extremely important because it not only has hereditary instructions that are going to be passed on to the next generation, but it's also the blueprint for how to make proteins to help you survive. And we've already talked about in class that proteins do everything except for control hereditary instructions because that's the job of DNA. All right, so when we look at the DNA, or look at the nucleus, you can see there's an additional membrane around it. Sometimes this membrane is called the nuclear envelope, which kind of makes sense because you think about an envelope helps to protect the stuff inside of your letter that you're sending through snail mail, if any of you happen to still use that. There's also little spaces in it, so things that can get into the nucleus are able to get in, and it helps to make it so other things are left out. And then inside of here, you're going to find all your DNA. All right, so let's take a moment and look at the nuclear membrane. So, like I already said, this is just an additional surrounding to help protect the nucleus because that DNA is so important. We want something else in place to provide even further protection, because if the DNA gets damaged, that means the cell can no longer exist in the state at which it already is. All right, so the nuclear membranes essentially act and allow things in and out, just like we talked about with the cell membrane. Only now we're talking specific to a location. We're talking about in the nucleus. So we've discussed two things. So if you look on the animal cell here, if we find the nucleus, there it is. And the nucleus is this big thing right here. You can just go through and color all the same color. But please recognize there is an additional membrane here that helps to protect the nucleus. Don't worry about if the nucleolus, I'm not concerned about that, at least for this class. If you want to know more about that, we'll get into that more when we get into EP Bio, if you choose to go that route. All right, in terms of the plant cell, we already talked about the bigger structure in the plant cell is the vacuole. So the next biggest structure is right here. This is your nucleus. And the same thing, don't worry about doing a separate color for the nuclear envelope. We'll just keep that in here saying, hey, the nuclear envelope has an extra layer of protection to help protect all that DNA. So at this point, you're going to want to pause the video so you can go through and color those things, but I'm going to keep going. So let's move on to the ribosomes. All right, so with the ribosomes, these are the things that do quite a bit of work because they make the proteins. All right, you are going to find these all over the place inside of the cell. You're going to find them just hanging out in the cytoplasm, so we call those free-floating ribosomes. You also find them in what we call the endoplasmic reticulum, which is a really fun thing to say, so we'll get you going on that a little bit later on. But we abbreviate, we call that the ER. Alright, so you guys, if it makes the proteins, and proteins do everything, if we didn't have ribosomes, then I guess that means you would pretty much do nothing. So, we need to have the ability to make the things that do all the work for us. So, one of the important proteins, remember, is the enzymes. Enzymes are an example of proteins. We've already talked about the fact that enzymes help to control all the chemical reactions going on inside your cells. So, if we didn't have those control measures in place, we wouldn't be able to have those chemical reactions happening at the rate at which we want them to actually occur. So, extremely important for making those. The reason why you are not as ugly as me is because of the proteins that you make. Alright, the thing that makes us all different from one another is our DNA, and you'll be very surprised when we talk about DNA and I start giving you percentages about how much your DNA is similar to mine. It's a very small percentage of that DNA that makes you different from me, and thus you less ugly than me. The reason why you don't have my ugliness is because of the proteins that your body's making, your cells are making compared to mine. Right? That DNA helps control those proteins. So we're all different from one another because of our DNA, but we don't see it through the DNA. We see it because of the work of what the proteins do to make us all look different from one another. And thankfully, you don't have the same combination of DNA of nucleotides as I do. So another example of my picture is not going to help you. This is a picture of something called translation, the making of a protein. And you're seeing the first codon here coming into play. This isn't helpful to you, so please don't draw this as you're drawing. Draw something that helps you remember what ribosomes do. All right, and I'm going to stop giving you hints on that. It's time for you guys to start trying to figure some of that out for yourself. So we have the ribosomes. All right, then we also have something called the Golgi body. And for some reason, a group of scientists got together at some point and said, you know what, let's make this a little more difficult on kids. We're not going to call it just the Golgi body. We're going to call it the Golgi apparatus. I've seen it called the Golgi structure. There's another one that I'm forgetting. Golgi body, Golgi apparatus. I can't remember the other one. I'm sure I'll say it at some point in class. But the Golgi body is kind of like the UPS people. Takes those proteins, it modifies them. It sorts them, it packages them, so it puts it into boxes, and then helps to send it off where it needs to go. All right, so the Golgi body modifies, sorts, and packages proteins, and then helps to transport them to where they need to be used. So like I said, I liken this, my analogy is mail service or UPS or whatever it may be. Maybe you could use the color brown for taking the notes for this one. I don't know what to think of that one. All right, so an example of what the Golgi body looks like. You can see, look at all the folds in here. There's a big advantage to all these folds. It helps to increase the surface area, which means it's allowed to take in more proteins at a time, so it can do more work at the same time than it would if it didn't have all these little folds in there. All right, so there's the Golgi body. So you're going to want to pause it at this point, find the Golgi body, and find the ribosomes. When you're coloring the ribosomes, you guys, that one's going to be pretty tough because they're all free-floating and hanging out up there. Don't go too crazy on the ribosomes. All the little dots in here, those are for the most part ribosomes. You can see some of this stuff has the dots on there. Those are ribosomes. That's examples of what we call the rough ER. When we look at our plant cell, got the same thing going. All the little dots out here are essentially ribosomes. Then we got some rough ER as well. I want you to hold off on coloring the rough ER. We're going to color that a different color. So don't spend a lot of time coloring your ribosomes because that's going to take you forever. Don't do it. It's not worth the time. All right, so then we're also looking for the Golgi. We saw the Golgi kind of looks like little macaronis. There's our Golgi right here on the animal cell. And does this necessarily show you the number that there are in each cell? No, there's more than this. All right, and it might be bigger than this, might be smaller. It's based upon the type of cell that you're dealing with. And then let's see if we can find it on the plant cell. We have Golgi on the plant cell. This right here appears to be the Golgi. So you notice I'm coloring it with the color that I took my notes with. All right, so pause the video and take a few moments and color in the ribosomes. Don't spend too much time on that part, and the Golgi body. Now let's move into the endoplasmic reticulum. The endoplasmic reticulum is the area where lipids are getting made. In some cases, proteins are getting made. You'll see the difference here in just a few moments. And what this really does is it provides a passageway for things to be able to travel through the cell. Those things that I'm referring to are primarily the proteins and lipids. All right, there's two different versions of endoplasmic reticulum, which we abbreviate ER. There's the smooth ER and there's the rough ER. The smooth ER does not have ribosomes embedded in it. All right, so it doesn't have those little speed bumps all over the place in it. All right, this is the location in your cells where lipids are getting made. Remember, lipids are used for helping to make waterproof coatings. So they're also used for helping to make membranes. Guys, most of these organelles we're talking about right now have membranes around them. So it's extremely important to have a location where these lipids are going to get made because we need to continuously make more of that to be able to repair things in the cell membranes and in the membranes of the organelles. Or if we need to make more organelles, we've got to be able to have more lipids to be able to make those membranes. So this is an extremely important feature of the cell. And so you can see this here. Once again, you can see all the folding that goes on that helps to increase the surface area of the ER, which helps to make it a little bit more efficient and a little bit more functional. All right, then you have the rough ER, which has ribosomes in it. And so because the ribosomes are there and they're making the proteins, the rough ER helps to take those proteins and get them where they're needed. All right, so it works very similar to the way the Golgi works, and the rough ER and the Golgi work together quite a bit. Now, the rough ER will help get the proteins to the Golgi. To give more of an analogy with the Golgi, I think of the Golgi similar to being the auto body shop. You know, you get your car, it comes off the line, it's functional, it can be used, but is it as good as it could possibly be? No. So we send it to the body shop so they can make it all pretty and tie all the loose ends together and make it a very effective vehicle. That's similar to what the Golgi does. The way you get the things to the Golgi, those proteins to the Golgi, is through the rough ER. And there's substances called vesicles that are used to help do that transport. But once again, that's something that's a little bit beyond the scope of what I'm going to hold you guys accountable for. So we can see a picture of our rough ER there. Alright, so at this point, I'd like you to color in the rough ER and the smooth ER. So you can see we have some rough ER here on the animal cell, and then we have some smooth ER there. And then if we switch over to the plant cell, oh, that's the animal cell again, dummy. So we go over to the plant cell, you can see rough ER here, and then we have some smooth ER. Where's the smooth ER? I'm having a hard time with that. It's labeled K2. Sorry, bad eyes, gotta look closer. Oh, I labeled this wrong earlier. Oh, crud. This is not the Golgi. This is the smooth ER. So what were they using for the Golgi on this? Looks like they were using I. Ah, that's what they were using for the Golgi. If you've already gone through and colored it, let's not throw a big fit. Let's not start throwing colored pencils at one another. Just change the labels because appearance-wise, they're very similar. So just change I to smooth ER and change K2 to the Golgi. It's not that big of a deal. I'm more worried about you knowing the function than I am about you being able to identify those two, just because they really do look similar to one another when you look at them under a microscope as well. If I'm wrong on that, and you guys can prove me wrong, good for you. But I don't think I am. Alright, so pause the video at this point and go through and do those colors. Last piece we're going to look at, we're going to do all this, we'll finish it up here. So I think I have more than 2 organelles, I think it's 3, but hey, deal with it. So next we're going to look at 2 structures that are found primarily only in plant cells. Now I need to put a disclaimer out there. For me to actually say this accurately, it's best for me to say the cell wall is found not in animal cells. Because there are other cells out there that have cell walls. Some bacteria have cell walls. You also have, most fungi have cell walls. Plant cells have cell walls as well. Same thing with chloroplasts. When we get into the chloroplasts, some bacteria have chloroplasts. Right? But they're never found in an animal cell. So the next 2 are 2 things that you will not find in animal cells. And because the only other one we're looking at right now is the plant cells, we're going to say you find them in the plant cells. What the cell wall does is helps to provide additional protection and helps to provide structure for the plant cells. And this is extremely important when you think about the fact that plants can't move to be able to go to a new location when resources run out. All right? They can't migrate and they can't go on long journeys in search of water. They just got to hang out. So they got to have a structure in place that helps to protect those cells when there are environmental changes. And it's really the cell wall that helps to be able to do that. And it's the cell wall is a big part of the reason why they're able to compete with one another, because there's still competition going on. They'll compete with one another to be able to get taller, to be able to absorb more of the sun's solar radiation, or light radiation. So pretty important stuff. And you're going to find this outside of your cell membrane. All right, so if you look in the plant cell, that thick layer that's outside of the cell membrane, that is the cell wall. And this is extremely important because it helps to make it so the plant can actually grow tall rather than having to move around. All right, so we find these in plants, we find them in fungi, and we find them in some bacteria as well. So I wanted to throw that disclaimer out there. We also have the chloroplast. This is the thing that makes life possible. All right, it absorbs the sun's energy and helps convert the water and carbon dioxide into food and oxygen. We have a fancy name for this. You've heard the name. It's called photosynthesis. All right, I need to throw another disclaimer out there. My comment about the chloroplast being what makes life possible is not completely accurate because there are some organisms out there that use a process called chemosynthesis. I don't want to get into that right now. We will get into that later in the semester, though. All right, so the reason why you are able to exist the way you do today is largely in part to a part of a cell that you don't even have. Kind of weird, huh? All right, you find these in green plant cells only, and there are some bacteria that have a modified chloroplast as well. All right, so I guess I was wrong. There are only 2. So now we only got to concentrate on the plant cell. You have your cell wall here. And then you can find your chloroplasts, just so I don't mess it up like I did the last one. Let's look for structure F. That's these things right here. So we got a chloroplast there. There's another chloroplast here. There's more here. And there's a lot more than 3 in a plant cell, but that's just the way the picture works. All right, so to round this out, when we compare animal and plant cells, animal cells have only the cell membrane and they're typically more round. When you look at plant cells, they typically have a cell membrane and a cell wall. All right, their vacuoles are much bigger because they're storing that water. And the chloroplasts are found in the plant cells and they're not found in the animal cells. And they typically have more of a rectangular shape. All right, and so I think that's enough for today regarding plants and animal cells. Be ready. We're going to be looking at some of these under the microscope soon. We're going to spend a little more time reviewing and reinforcing this. And to go with the review and reinforcement, let me give you your next assignment. You will be drawing for what we call our cell advertisement. So you will be picking an organelle. And what you're going to do with that organelle is you're going to go through and design an advertisement for the organelle. All right, so whoever your teacher is right now, whether it happens to be me there today, whether it happens to be somebody else, they should have a bag so that you can go through and draw a particular organelle. Whatever organelle you draw, you're going to design some sort of advertisement that makes people want to buy your organelle. A couple of requirements with this. It should be professional looking. Alright, don't give me something that somebody's going to look at and say, no way. Alright, it should look nice. Okay? 2, you need to have a slogan. You know, you can't sell a product unless you have a snazzy, some sort of snazzy slogan. So, have a slogan. You should have something in your advertisement. What are you trying to sell? You know, do you need to actually sell the Golgi? No. Sell the service that the Golgi body actually does. Alright, so that means so what are you trying to sell? You know, are you trying to sell the structure or the service? What are you looking at doing? So professional looking, you need to have a slogan. You obviously need a product name. And here's my one request, because we've been working with these analogies so much. I do not want the organelle name anywhere on the advertisement. What you're instead going to do is write the organelle on the back of it. Alright, to go with the professional looking, it can be digital, or we'll go digital or 3D. So you can do it in digital format, or you can do it in a 3D paper format. All right, and what are you trying to sell? And I think that is good enough for your advertisement. So let me show you some examples here. Let me see if I can get it so I can actually see my camera. Holy smoke, this is a long video. Sorry, guys. So, if you take a look, turn it for you. What you should be able to see, and I apologize, I'm not good with this camera. Here's an example of a cell advertisement. Alright, it was for the TJ Cafe. Alright, they had protein shakes, they had protein pizza, they have protein pie, they have all kinds of good stuff that relate to proteins. Well, what organelle do you think this one is trying to advertise for? It's trying to advertise for the ribosome. Alright, and that's what, when you take the time to present these to, whether we do it in small groups, whether you do this to the entire class, I haven't figured out that part yet. That's what we're going to try to do as a class. Your audience is going to try to figure out what organelle is it that is being represented by your advertisement. Got another one here. Alright, now they didn't follow one of the requirements, but it's still a decent one. You can see they have the 3-in-1 vacuole cabinet, so they're trying to sell a storage cabinet. You notice the top shelf is for food, the middle shelf is for water, then you have a spot for waste. They actually have their price, so that's kind of fun. If you call them now, it's only $69.99. All right, talks about what it does. It's missing a slogan, though. All right, so there's one thing missing there. In fact, the other one's missing a slogan, too. That's a new thing that I'm adding this semester anyway. All right, so take your organelle, put together an advertisement where you're trying to sell either the structure of the organelle or whether you're trying to sell the service that the organelle provides. And then you can do this either digitally. I don't have computers available for you today, but you can work on this at home if you prefer to do so, or you can do it on construction paper. There's plenty of paper back underneath the periodic table. These advertisements are due tomorrow. All right, so when we're done with the notes, you guys can spend the rest of the time working on the advertisements. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. I'll check the Facebook page tomorrow night, so feel free to get on there and post any questions you may have. And I look forward to seeing you guys next time I see you.